The year is 401 before the Common Era, and deep within the sun-scorched plains of Mesopotamia, a sudden, suffocating silence falls over 10,000 Greek mercenaries. They stand thousands of miles from the crashing waves of the Aegean Sea, isolated in the very heart of the mighty Achaemenid Persian Empire. Moments ago, they fought for a rebel prince, Cyrus the Younger, seeking to overthrow his brother, King Artaxerxes II. But Cyrus lies dead on the field of Cunaxa, his rebellion shattered in an instant. As the ancient biographer Plutarch later observed, the Greeks had won their specific tactical clash, yet they suddenly awoke to a terrifying geopolitical reality. They were completely alone, stripped of their employer, their supplies, and their purpose. Around them, the dust of battle begins to settle, revealing an endless horizon of hostile territory, glinting with the spears of a vengeful imperial army. The physical toll is already immense. Sweat streaks through the thick grime on their faces, and the heavy bronze cuirasses, meant for short, decisive battles on Greek hillsides, now feel like suffocating iron cages under the blistering eastern sun. The mental weight is heavier still. These men are not a unified state army. They are Spartans, Athenians, and Thebans, traditional rivals bound together only by gold and the shared instinct for survival. Now, the gold is gone. Modern military historians, looking back at this exact moment of strategic isolation, often describe it as one of the most absolute logistical nightmares in the history of ancient warfare. The great king's forces outnumber them immensely, stretching across the horizon in disciplined, glittering lines of cavalry and archers. To surrender means execution or lifelong slavery in the distant corners of Asia. To fight seems suicidal. As twilight begins to bleed across the Mesopotamian sky, casting long, ominous shadows over the Euphrates, the 10,000 men grip their spears with aching fingers, realizing that every step backward will have to be bought with blood. The despair that follows sudden betrayal is a quiet, paralyzing poison. In the days following Cunaxa, the Persian satrap Tissaphernes offered the Greeks a truce, inviting their senior commanders, including the Spartan general Clearchus, to a diplomatic feast. It was a trap of breathtaking cruelty. The generals were seized and summarily executed, leaving the army entirely leaderless in a single afternoon. As Xenophon himself records in his Anabasis, that night was the darkest the army had ever known. Few men tasted food, fewer still lit campfires. Soldiers lay on the bare earth, staring up at the unfamiliar stars, weeping for the homelands they believed they would never see again. The psychological collapse was nearly absolute. They were surrounded by deep rivers they could not cross, pursued by a colossal imperial army, and possessed no cavalry to screen their movements or archers to return fire. Yet, as the eminent military historian John Keegan notes in his studies of ancient command, it is precisely in the crucible of such total structural collapse that democratic resilience can manifest. Out of the shadows stepped Xenophon, a young Athenian philosopher-soldier who had followed Cyrus merely as a friend. He did not claim divine right or royal blood. Instead, he appealed to their shared survival, convincing the remaining captains to elect new leaders. They reconfigured their entire tactical doctrine, organizing the 10,000 into a massive, hollow square formation. The baggage train and camp followers were placed safely in the center, protected on all sides by the heavy bronze walls of the hoplite phalanx. They burned their superfluous wagons and tents, stripping themselves down to the bare essentials of survival. They knew that to stay still was to die, and to retreat along the Euphrates was impossible. Their only path lay north, directly into the rugged, uncharted highlands, where the weather grew bitterly cold and the terrain grew vertical. The tension in the camp shifted from paralyzing dread to an icy, focused desperation as the first horns blew at dawn. As the retreating army pushed northward into the rugged highlands of Kurdistan, the Persian vanguard struck with relentless, asymmetric fury. Tissaphernes did not risk a direct phalanx clash. Instead, he unleashed swarms of horse archers and slingers whose missiles outranged the short, thrown javelins of the Greeks. Xenophon describes how the sky darkened with a deadly rain of lead and bronze, chipping away at the wooden shields of the rear guard. The hollow square, designed for static defense, became a tragic, lumbering target. Men fell without ever seeing their enemies, their bronze greaves clattering against the rocky paths. The physical agony was acute. Fingers froze around spear shafts as the autumn air turned bitter, and the constant, rhythmic thrumming of Persian bowstrings began to break the soldiers' resolve. Realizing that passive endurance meant slow annihilation, Xenophon executed a brilliant tactical adaptation. He stripped the baggage train of its remaining horses to form a makeshift cavalry unit of 50 men, while organizing Rhodian slingers who utilized heavy lead bullets. When the next wave of Persian skirmishers approached, confident in their hit-and-run dominance, the Greeks unleashed their new counter-skirmishers. The Rhodians completely outranged the Persian archers, shattering helmets from afar, while the makeshift cavalry charged into the panicked ranks. As the modern historian Dan Jones emphasizes in his analysis of ancient fighting retreats, this was the pivotal moment where the hunter became the hunted. The Greeks proved they could adapt to any environment. The Persians, realizing the rising cost of engagement, pulled back. But the relief was short-lived. Ahead lay the vertical, snow-choked passes of the independent Carduchian tribes. Here, massive boulders crashed down into narrow defile, and arrows 3 feet long pierced clean through bronze shields. Trapped in a vertical gauntlet, the exhausted mercenaries realized their war was no longer just against an empire, but against the unforgiving earth itself. The brutal winter of the Armenian highlands nearly accomplished what the Persian Empire could not. Blinded by driving snowstorms and crippled by severe frostbite, the remaining soldiers marched like ghosts through the frozen wastes. Xenophon recalls men losing their toes to the black frost and dropping from sheer exhaustion, left behind to die in the snow. Then, as the vanguard crested a towering mountain ridge known as Mount Thex, a massive, chaotic roar suddenly erupted from the front lines. Xenophon, commanding the rear guard, feared a devastating ambush and desperately spurred his horse forward through the blinding snowdrifts to reinforce his men. But as he drew closer, the frantic shouting resolved into a single, ecstatic, weeping cry that echoed across the icy peaks. "Thalata! Thalata! The sea! The sea!" The Euxine Sea glinted on the distant horizon, representing home, survival, and ultimate salvation. Exhausted soldiers fell into each other's arms, weeping openly, their long nightmare finally breaking against the rocky shore. As the modern historian Peter Jackson notes in his comparative studies of military endurance, this legendary moment transcended a mere tactical escape. It was a psychological triumph of collective human will over absolute geopolitical isolation. Yet the historical aftermath stretched far beyond their emotional homecoming. Of the 10,000 who originally set out, thousands had perished, their bones scattered across the deep, unforgiving heart of Asia. Those survivors who returned were permanently altered, hardened by an impossible journey. Crucially, their march exposed a fatal strategic truth. The vast and legendary Achaemenid Empire was physically vulnerable, a colossus with clay feet. Decades later, this stunning realization would directly inspire the conquests of Alexander the Great himself. The march ended at the water's edge, but it permanently recharted ancient history, proving that discipline and democratic resolve could defy the world's most formidable and terrifying empire.